think of this book as a sampler. You, the reader, need not start at the beginning and work your way through to the end. If you want to, feel free, otherwise, scan the table of contents and read whatever items interest you most. About McKinsey. To provide some background for those of you unfamiliar with McKinsey and Company, I offer a few words about the organization that its members past and present refer to as the firm. Since its founding in 1923, McKinsey & Company has become the world's most successful strategic consulting firm. It currently has 75 offices, and counting, around the world and employs some 4,500 professionals. It may not be the largest strategy firm in the world. Some of the big accounting firms have larger practices, but it is certainly the most prestigious. McKinsey consults to most of the Fortune 100, as well as to many U.S. state and federal agencies and foreign governments. McKinsey is a brand name in international business circles. Several senior McKinsey partners have risen to international prominence in their own right. Lowell Bryan advised the Senate Banking Committee during the savings and loan crisis. Kenichi Ami, who recently left the firm, writes books on management. 11. Copyright 1999 Ethan M. Rasiel. Click here for terms of use. And futurology that are best sellers in Japan. Herb Hensler advised former German Chancellor Helmut Kohl on business and economic matters. Even more visible are some of McKinsey's alumni, who have gone on to senior positions around the world. Tom Peters, management guru and co-author of In Search of Excel Lens, Harvey Golub, president of American Express, and Adair Turner, president of the Confederation of British Industries, to name but three. To maintain its preeminent position, and to earn its high fees, the firm seeks out the cream of each year's crop of business school graduates. It lures them with high salaries, the prospect of a rapid rise through McKinsey's meritocratic hierarchy, and the chance to mingle with the elite of the business world. In return, the firm demands total devotion to client service, submission to a grueling schedule that can include weeks or months away from home and family, and only the highest quality work. For those who meet McKinsey standards, promotion can be rapid. Those who fall short soon find themselves at the latter end of the firm's strict pole icy of up or out. Like any strong organization, the firm has a powerful corporate culture based on shared values and common experiences. Every McKinseyite goes through the same rigorous training programs and suffers through the same long nights in the office. To outsiders, this can make the firm seem monolithic and forbidding. One recent book on management consulting likened McKinsey to the Jesuits. In truth, as I hope this book will communicate, McKinsey is as human as its employees are. The firm has its own jargon too. It is full of acronyms: EM, ED, DCS, ITP, ELT, BPR, and so forth. McKinseyites call their assignments or projects engagements. On an engagement, a McKinsey team will search for the key drivers in their quest to add value. Like most jargon, much of this is simply verbal shorthand. Some 12 Introduction of it, however, once understood, can be as useful to business people outside the firm as it is to McKinseyites themselves. In sum, like any powerful organization, McKinsey is complex. I hope this book will lift at least a corner of the veil of the McKinsey mystique and allow you, the reader, a peek into the inner workings of a very successful company. About this book, I have divided this book into 5 parts. In the first 3, I explain how McKinseyites think about business problems and how they work at solving them. Parts 1 through 3 are the meat of the book, and I hope that you will find in them something new to help you in your business career. In Part 4, I give some lessons McKinseyites have learned for coping with the stresses of life at the firm. Anyone who works hard in today's business world should learn something useful, or at least amusing, there. Finally, Part 5 briefly recounts some lessons learned at the firm and shares a few memories of McKinsey. I wrote this book with the goal of communicating new and useful skills to everyone who wants to be more efficient and effective in business. Anyone who wants to learn proven methods for approaching business problems in a structured, fact-based way will find them in these pages. And anyone looking for survival tips in the jungle of today's business world can benefit from doing things the McKinsey Way. In addition, this book will give any executive who works with management consultants, whether from McKinsey or elsewhere, some insight into how these strange beings think. Although each consulting firm has, or at least claims to have, its own methods, the root of all management consulting is the application of object. Introduction 13. Type analysis by dispassionate outsiders. Other firms may not do things the McKinsey way, but their consultants' minds work in similar ways to McKinseyites. Forewarned is forearmed. I based this book on my own experience as a McKinsey associate from 1989 to 1992. I learned an enormous amount in that time, but scarcely enough for me to explain to the world the skills that McKinseyites use to succeed. Fortunately, I had help. I interviewed dozens of former associates, engagement managers, and partners of the firm. Their knowledge and the lessons they learned during their time at McKinsey helped fill the many gaps in my own knowledge. About clients. The word client appears in almost every chapter of this book. Since I'm writing from the McKinsey perspective, I use client to mean the organization for which you are solving a business problem. If you are not a consultant of some form, then strictly speaking, when you are working on a business problem, you don't have a client. I'd like to put it another way: you, or your organization, are your own client. Seen that way, the term client becomes applicable to any organization in which you work, whether as outsider or insider. In addition, I believe that thinking about your own organization as your client does make it easier to take advantage of the techniques in this book. About clients. The word client appears in almost every chapter of this book. Since I'm writing from the McKinsey perspective, I use client to mean the organization for which you are solving a business problem. If you are not a consultant of some form, then strictly speaking, when you are working on a business problem, you don't have a client. I'd like to put it another way: you, or your organization, are your own client. Seen that way, the term client becomes applicable to any organization in which you work, whether as outsider or insider. In addition, I believe that thinking about your own organization as your client does make it easier to take advantage of the techniques in this book. Part 1. The McKinsey Way of Thinking About Business Problems. McKinsey exists to solve business problems. The consultants who succeed at McKinsey love to solve problems. As one former EM asterisk put it, problem solving isn't a thing you do at McKinsey, it's what you do at McKinsey. It's almost as though you approached everything looking for ways it could be better, whatever it was. A part of you is always asking, why is something done this way? Is this the best way it can be done? You have to be fundamentally skeptical about everything. Part 1 describes how McKinsey thinks about business problems. It shows what it means to be fact-based, structured, and hypothesis-driven. It will tell you the McKinsey way to approach a business problem, and offer you a few choice rules to live by when trying to solve them. Asterisk engagement manager. The EM is in charge of the day-to-day work of a McKinsey team. 1. Building the solution. Like all things McKinsey, the firm's problem-solving process has three major attributes. When team members meet for the first time to discuss their client's problem, they know that their solution will be fact-based, rigidly structured, hypothesis-driven asterisk. In this chapter, you will learn exactly what these attributes mean and how you can apply them in your business. 3. Asterisk at McKinsey, 3 is a magic number. Things at the firm come in threes. Notice that this list has 3 items. Ask a McKinseyite a complex question, and you are likely to hear, there are 3 reasons. Then, of course, as you will learn later in the book, there is the true McKinsey hierarchy for consultants, in descending order: client, firm, you. Facts are friendly. Facts are the bricks with which you will lay a path to your solution and build pillars to support it. Don't fear the facts. Problem solving at the firm begins with facts. On the first day of an engagement, all members of the team comb through stacks of articles and internal research documents to gather enough facts to illuminate their piece of the problem for the first team meeting. Having drawn up an initial hypothesis for the problem, the team then races to gather the facts necessary, when put through the appropriate analyses, to support or refute it. At the start of your time at McKinsey, gathering and analyzing facts is your raison d'etre. As one former SEM * observed, when you strip away a lot of the high-minded language with which McKinsey dresses up its problem-solving process, it comes down to very careful, high-quality analysis of the components of the problem combined with an aggressive attitude toward fact-gathering. Why are facts so important to the way McKinsey does business? There are two reasons. First, facts compensate for lack of gut instinct, see. But every client is unique, in Chapter 2. Most McKinseyites are generalists. They know a little about a lot of things. As they gain experience and move through the ranks, they may come to know a lot about a lot of things. Even at this point, however, they will still know less about, say, inventory. For thinking about business problems. Senior engagement manager. In many ways a junior partner, the SEM is in charge of multiple studies and is expected to take a hand in client relations. SEMs get all the stress of partnership with less pay. Management practices for perishable foodstuffs than the folks who have been running the distribution operations of Stop and Shop for the last 10 years. Gut instinct might tell those folks the solution to an inventory management problem in 10 seconds, although they still would be wise to check the facts. McKinsey will go to the facts first. Second, facts bridge the credibility gap. When she joins the firm, the typical associate *, at least in the United States, will have graduated near the top of her college class, spent 2 or 3 years working for a large company, then received her MBA from a top business school. She will be in her mid to late 20s. On her first engagement she may have to present her analysis to the CEO of a Fortune 50 company, who will not give much credence to what some newly minted, 27-year-old MBA has to say, unless she has an overwhelming weight of facts to back her up. This is just as true for a junior executive presenting a proposal to his boss. Despite, or possibly because of, the power of facts, many business people fear them. Perhaps they are afraid that if they look too closely at the facts, they, or someone above them, might not like what they see. Maybe they think that if they don't look, the nasty facts will go away, but they won't. Hiding from the facts is a prescription for failure. Eventually, truth will out. You must not fear the facts. Hunt for them, use them, but don't fear them. Building the Solution 5. Associate, an entry-level McKinsey consultant, usually with an MBA. Technically, every consultant who has not made partner, even the hottest SEM, is still an associate of the firm. Feel free to be MECE to structure your thinking when solving business problems, or anything, for that matter. You must be complete while avoiding confusion and overlap. MECE, pronounced MECE, stands for mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive, and it is a sine qua non of the problem-solving lectively exhaustive, and it is a sine qua non of the problem-solving process at McKinsey. MECE gets pounded into every new associate's process at McKinsey. MECE gets pounded into every new associate's head from the moment of entering the firm. Every document, including internal memos, every presentation, every email and voicemail produced by a McKinseyite is supposed to be MECE. Ask any number of McKinsey alumni what they remember most about the way the firm solves problems and they will tell you, MECE, MECE, MECE. MECE structures your thinking with maximum clarity, hence minimum confusion, and maximum completeness. MECE starts at the top level of your solution, the list of issues making up the problem you have to solve. When you think you have determined the issues, take a hard look at them. Is each one a separate and distinct issue? If so, then your issue list is mutually exclusive. Does every aspect of the problem come under one, and only one, of these issues? That is, have you thought of everything? If so, then your issues are collectively exhaustive. Suppose your team is working on a study for that famous American manufacturing firm Acme Widgets. The problem you face is, we need to sell more widgets. Your team might come up with a list of the following ways to increase widget sales. Changing the way we sell our widgets to retail outlets. Improving the way we market our widgets to consumers. Reducing the unit cost of our widgets. 6. Thinking about business problems. If this list looks rather generic, that's fine. We will talk about moving down a level of detail in the next section. What matters is that the list is MECE. MECE. Suppose you add another item, say, re-engineering our widget production process. How does that fit with the 3 issues you already have? This is certainly an important issue, but it isn't a 4th point alongside the others. It falls under reducing the unit cost, along with other sub-issues such as leveraging our distribution system and improving our inventory management. Why? Because all these are ways to reduce the unit cost of widgets. Putting any, or all, of them with the other 3 issues on the list would cause an overlap. The items in the list would no longer be mutually exclusive. Overlap represents muddled thinking by the writer and leads to confusion for the reader. Once you have a list in which all the items are separate and distinct, i.e., mutually exclusive, you have to check that it also includes every issue or item relevant to the problem, i.e., it is collectively exhaustive. Go back for a moment to re-engineering our widget production process. You put this under reducing the unit cost. Now one of your team members says, we should think about ways to improve widget quality through the product tie-in process. She's right. Does this mean you should go back to having re-engineering as an issue in its own right? No, but you should refine your list to include, under reducing unit cost, the sub-issue re-engineering the production process to reduce unit cost, and, under improving the way we market, the sub-issue re-engineering the production process to improve widget quality. Now you have something that looks like this. Changing the way we sell our widgets to retail outlets. Improving the way we market our widgets to consumers. Building the solution 7. Re-engineering the production process to improve widget quality. Reducing the unit cost of our widgets. Re-engineering the production process to reduce unit cost. Suppose your team has come up with some interesting ideas that don't fit under the main issues. What then? You could ignore those points, but that wouldn't help Acme. You could make them issues in their own right, but then you would have too many issues. A good McKinsey issue list contains neither fewer than 2 nor more than 5 top-line issues. Of course, 3 is best. Of course, 3 is best. There is a solution to this dilemma, the magical category, other issues. If you can't figure out where to put those 2 or 3 brilliant ideas, there is always other issues. There is a caveat, however. Avoid using other issues in your top-line list, it looks out of place. It's fine lumped in among a bunch of sub-issues, but on the first slide of a big presentation, it sticks out. So try a little harder to fit those brilliant ideas into your top-line issues. Chances are you can. Still, if all else fails, other issues will help you stay MECE. Solve the problem at the first meeting, the initial hypothesis. Solving a complex problem is like embarking on a long journée. The initial hypothesis is your problem-solving map. The initial hypothesis, IH, the third pillar of the McKinsey problem-solving process, is the most difficult to explain. To make the explanation easier for you and me, I will break this section into 3 parts. 8. Thinking about business problems. Defining the initial hypothesis. The essence of the initial hypothesis is figure out the solution to the problem before you start. This seems counterintuitive, yet you do it all the time. Suppose you have to drive to a restaurant in a part of town you don't know. You know you have to make the third left off Smith Street and then take the first right. It's just after that corner. You know how to get to Smith Street, you'll just follow your directions from there. Congratulations, you have an initial hypothesis. Solving business problems is more complicated than finding a restaurant, but the initial hypothesis works the same way. It is a roadmap, albeit hastily sketched, to take you from problem to solution. If your IH is correct, then solving the problem means filling in the details of the map through factual analysis. Let's return to Acme widgets from the last section. You and your team must find a way to increase sales at the widget business unit. After you've brainstormed using your knowledge of the widget MECE, but before you've spent a lot of time gathering and analyzing the facts, you might come up with the following top-line IH. We can increase widget sales by changing the way we sell our widgets to retail outlets, improving the way we market our widgets to consumers, reducing the unit cost of our widgets. As I will show in the next section, you would then take each issue down to another level or 2 of detail to determine which analyses you need in order to prove or disprove each hypothesis. Remember that a hypothesis is merely a theory to be proved. Building the solution 9. Or disproved. It is not the answer. If your IH is correct, then, a few months down the road, it will be the first slide in your presentation. If it turns out to be wrong, then, by proving it wrong, you will have enough information to move toward the right answer. By putting your IH down on paper, and determining how you can prove or disprove it, you have set up a roadmap that you can follow to an eventual proved solution. Generating the initial hypothesis. The IH emerges from the combination of facts and structure. Therefore, as the first step in generating an IH, you must start with the facts. Remember, however, that you don't want to do a lot of digging around for information before you know where to dig. One former McKinsey SEM had a good approach for generating IHs. At the start of an engagement, I would just try to digest as much of our fact base as possible. I would sit down with the trade publications in that industry for an hour or 2, not so much to gather facts as to absorb something of the flavor of that industry, what the jargon is, what the current industry issues are. I would especially seek out people in the firm who knew about this particular industry. That was the quickest, most efficient way to get up to speed. When generating an initial hypothesis, you don't need all the facts, just enough to have a good overview of the industry and the problem. If the problem is in your own business, you may already have the facts in your head. That's great, but facts are not enough. You have to apply structure to them. To structure your IH, begin by breaking the problem into its components, the key drivers. Find the key drivers, in Chapter 3. Next, make an actionable recommendation regarding each driver. This is extremely important. Suppose your businesses. 10. Thinking about business problems. Profits are greatly affected by the weather. In fact, it is the key determinant of profits in a given quarter. We have to pray for good weather is not an actionable recommendation. On the other hand, we must reduce our vulnerability to changes in the weather is an actionable, top-line recommendation. For your next step, you must take each top-line recommendation and break it down to the level of issues. If a given recommendation is correct, what issues does it raise? Consider the likely answers to each issue. Then go down another level. For each issue, what analyses would you need to make to prove or disprove your hypothesis? With a little experience, and a lot of debate within your team, you should get a good sense of what is provable and what is not. This will help you avoid blind alleys. In the Acme widgets problem, suppose your team decided that the key drivers were the sales force, the consumer marketing strat, EGY, and production costs. You then came up with a list of action able, top-line recommendations as your initial hypothesis. We can increase widget sales by changing the way we sell our widgets to retail outlets, improving the way we market our widgets to consumers, reducing the unit cost of our widgets. Let's begin with a closer look at the sales force. It's organized geographically, Northeast, Mid-Atlantic, Southeast, etc., and sells primarily to 3 types of retail outlets: superstores, department stores, and specialty stores. The team believes that the sales force ought to be organized by customer type. That's one issue. What analyses could prove or disprove that belief? You could break out the sales by customer type for each region. If penetration of superstores in the Northeast is higher than in any other region and higher than for the other types of retail outlets, find out why. When you talk to the Northeast sales reps, you might. Building the solution 11. Find that they have a better feel for superstores than any other sales team. What if they were put in charge of all superstores across the country and achieved the same penetration? What would that mean for widget sales? The end product of this exercise is what McKinsey calls the issue tree. In other words, you start with your initial hypothesis and branch out at each issue. The result looks like the figure below. When you've completed your issue tree, you have your problem-solving map. That's the easy part. The difficult part will come when you have to dig deep to prove your hypothesis. 12. Thinking about business problems. Change sales strategy. Sales force organization. Sales force skill base. Promotion strategy. Product quality. Packaging. Consumer advertising strategy. Raw material sourcing. Production process. Distribution system. Improve marketing strategy. Reduce unit cost. Increase widget sales. Issue tree for Acme widgets. Testing the initial hypothesis before you take your problem-solving map out on the road. You want, forgive the mixed metaphor, to kick the tires on it. Test it. Is it the best possible hypothesis you could devise, given what you know about the industry and your client or company? Have you thought about all the issues? Have you considered all the drivers of the problem? Are all your recommendations actionable and provable? When I discussed generating an IH, I used the phrase, your team, rather than you. My experience at the firm, and that of the many McKinsey alumni I interviewed for this book, taught me that IHs produced by teams are much stronger than those produced by individuals. Why? Most of us are poor critics of our own thinking. We need others to pick apart our ideas. A team of 3 or 4 bright individuals is an excellent vehicle for that. So when your team meets to come up with an IH, let thou sandflowers bloom. Everyone should have his or her own ideas and initial hypotheses. Everyone should be prepared to push a teammate's thinking and test each new idea. If you are the team leader, you should try to be the thought leader too. Try to take a different approach from whatever has just been said. Ask, what if we change this? What if we push that? How about looking at it this way? The process involves shooting a certain amount of bull. That's okay, have fun, as long as it pushes your thinking. For more ideas and techniques to push your team's thinking, see Chapter 9. 2. Developing an approach. Just knowing the essence of the McKinsey problem-solving process does not mean you can now go forth and conquer the business world by being fact-based, structured, and hypothesis-driven. No 2 business problems are identical. You must figure out how to approach each problem in order to devise the best solution for it. In this chapter, I will explain how McKinseyites approach business problems and apply the McKinsey problem-solving process to maximum effect. 15. Copyright 1999 Ethan M. Rasiel. Click here for terms of use. The problem is not always the problem. Sometimes a business problem will land on your desk and you will be told to solve it. Fair enough. But before you go rushing off in any particular direction, make sure you solve the right problem. It may not be the one you were given. A McKinsey alumnus with a scientific background told me that business problem solving is organic and complex, like medicine. A patient will come into a doctor's office and say that he thinks he has the flu. He will tell the doctor about his symptoms: scratchy throat, achy head, and runny nose. The doctor will not immediately trust the patient's conclusion. She will take the patient's history, ask some probing questions, and then make her diagnosis. The patient may have the flu, or a cold, or something more serious, but the doctor will not rely on the patient to diagnose himself. At McKinsey, we found that clients were often no better at diagnosing themselves than a doctor's patients. Sometimes, problems would come to us in extremely vague formulations. In my first study at the firm, our team's mission was to help a New York investment bank increase profitability, the business equivalent of a patient telling the doctor, "I don't feel well." In another case, a McKinsey team went in to evaluate expansion opportunities for a division of a manufacturing company. After a few weeks of gathering and analyzing data, the team realized that what the division needed was not expansion, it was closure or sell-off. The only way to figure out if the problem you have been given is the real problem is to dig deeper. Get facts. Ask questions. Poke around. It usually does not take very long to figure out if you are heading down the right path, and the time you take up front will. 16. Thinking about business problems. More than make up for itself in time you don't waste further down the line. What do you do when you are convinced you are working on the wrong problem? When a doctor thinks that a patient's minor symptoms mask something more serious, she will tell her patient, "Mr. Jones, I can treat your headache, but I think it's a symptom of something more serious and I'd like to do further tests." In the same way, you should go back to your client, or your boss, whoever it was that asked for your input in the first place, and say, "You asked me to look at problem X, but the real impact on our performance will come from solving problem Y. Now I can solve problem X, if that's what you really want, but I think it's in our interest to focus on Y." If you have the data to back you up, the client can either accept your recommendation or tell you to stay on the original problem, but you will have fulfilled your responsibility to act in the client's best interests. Don't reinvent the wheel, Part 1. Most business problems resemble each other more than they differ. This means that with a small number of problem-solve techniques, you can answer a broad range of questions. These techniques may be somewhere in your organization, either written down or in the heads of your fellow employees. If not, use your experience to develop your own toolkit. McKinsey, like every other consulting firm, has developed a number of problem-solving methods and given them fancy names: analysis of value added, business process redesign, product MAR. Developing an approach 17. CAT scan, and so on. These techniques are immensely powerful. They allow McKinsey consultants very rapidly to fit the raw data that lands on their desks into a coherent framework and give them insights into the nature of the client's problem. The consultants can then focus their thinking on the drivers of the problem and start working toward a solution. We made frequent use of an analytical framework called Forces at Work. It proved especially valuable at the start of an engagement in helping us look at the likely external pressures on the client. The technique involves identifying the client's suppliers, customers, competitors, and possible substitute products. We then list all the changes occurring in each of the 4 categories. What impact, positive or negative, could these have on our client? Also, what internal changes are affecting the client and the client's industry? Which of these factors could actually cause major changes to the way the client designs, manufactures, distributes, sells, and services its products? Whatever business you're in, this framework will not only help you build a snapshot of your competitive environment, but also help you develop a view of how that environment might change. Try it. It sounds simple, but it is a powerful way to stimulate your thinking about strategic business problems. These frameworks really help at the start of the problem-solve process. For instance, when I was a second-year associate, I joined a team that was helping a major Wall Street investment bank reorganize its information technology department. All the executives at the bank wanted IT reorganized, but not if it meant any changes in the way their computers were supported. The IT department was a real mess, with 600 employees, a dozen different subdepartments, and a web of reporting relationships that made my head spin. I, and the rest of the team, hardly knew where to begin. 18. Thinking about business problems. Lately, the firm had recently developed a new paradigm, called business process redesign, that gave us a starting point. The firm was still coming to grips with BPR, and during the study we broke new ground for the firm. It was hard work, but BPR, along with a lot of sweat, Chinese food, and late nights, helped us help the client force through the reorganization. If we had not had at least a starting framework to help us focus our efforts, we might never have left the ground. But every client is unique, no cookie-cutter solutions. That there are many similarities between business problems does not mean that similar problems have similar solutions. You have to validate your initial hypothesis, or your gut, with fact-based analysis. This will put you in a much better position to get your ideas accepted. If all you have is a hammer, then every problem looks like a nail. Critics of McKinsey, and management consulting in general, say that the firm bases its solutions on the most current management fad, the favorite tool in its intellectual toolbox. At the firm, at least, this is untrue. Fact-based analysis as practiced by McKinsey requires hard proof before any recommended tie-ins are made to clients. Jason Klein, a former SEM at McKinsey and now publisher of Field and Stream and Outdoor Life, puts it like this. People think that the firm, and management consultants in general, have a pre-canned answer. That is certainly not the developing an approach 19 case at McKinsey. If it were, then the firm would not be as successful as it is. The tools may be the same from problem to problem, but you have to apply them. For instance, in my experience, in 8 out of 10 pricing problems the answer turns out to be, raise your prices. If you do the fact-based analysis, demand curves, break-even calculations, budgets, enough times, you see almost invariably that firms should be raising their prices. But if you automatically say that's the answer, you'll get into trouble, because you'll run into an instance where the answer is really lower your prices. As a corollary to avoiding cookie-cutter solutions, be careful about blindly trusting your gut. As you gain experience in business, as you see and solve more and more problems, you will get a fair idea of what works in your industry and what doesn't. Although your gut will often be right, take a hint from former President Reagan, trust and verify. As a McKinsey alumnus who now works as a merchant banker put it, a sharp manager with a lot of business experience can often reach the same conclusions as McKinsey, and in a much shorter time, by gut instinct, but most executives aren't that good. Because McKinsey focuses so intently on a problem, it often produces a more robust solution than even the best executive can. Most executives will miss a few things because they don't take the time. They usually don't have the time. 20. Thinking about business problems. Don't make the facts fit your solution. Avoid the temptation to view your initial hypothesis as the answer and the problem-solving process as an exercise in proving the IH. Keep an open and flexible mind. Don't let a strong initial hypothesis become an excuse for mental inflexibility. On an engagement for a major insurance company, the EM assured his team and the client that the key to restoring the client's profitability was eliminating leakage, the acceptance of customer claims without adjustment. He assigned a new associate to determine the rate of leakage in fire insurance claims over the previous 3 years. As any good McKinsey associate would, this young man applied himself tirelessly and diligently to his task. He combed through stacks of claims in search of leakage. The result: very little leakage, far less than the EM had predicted. Rather than take these data for what they were, an indication that he needed to re-examine his hypothesis, the EM simply told the young associate to look again, this time in auto insurance. And then in marine insurance and in business insurance. Nowhere were the expected rates of leakage to be found. One day, the EM was sitting in the team's on-site HQ looking slightly despondent. The team's main contact at the client poked his head around the doorpost. "What's the matter, Nick?" he said. "Not enough leakage for you?" The moral of this little tale is that, no matter how brilliant, insightful, and original you may feel your initial hypothesis to be, you must always be prepared to accept that the facts may prove. Developing an approach 21. You wrong. If they do, adjust to the facts. Don't try to pound them into your framework like square pegs into round holes. How do you avoid that trap? The McKinsey Way is to take an occasional step back from the continual grind of fact gathering and analysis and to ask yourself what you have learned over the past week, or 2 weeks, or whatever. How does the new Informa tie-in fit into your initial hypothesis? If it doesn't, how might it change that hypothesis? Doing these little reality checks now and then could save you from chasing down blind alleys. As a final note, I should add that the story, although true, represents the exception rather than the rule at McKinsey, at least in my experience. And that EM has long since left the firm. Make sure your solution fits your client. The most brilliant solution, backed up by libraries of data and promising billions in extra profits, is useless if your client or business can't implement it. Know your client. Know the organization's strengths, weaknesses, and capabilities, what management can and cannot do. Tailor your solutions with these factors in mind. A former McKinsey EM who now works on Wall Street tells this story. We were doing a cost-cutting study for a large financial institution. We discovered that they were in the midst of linking all their offices, they had several hundred around the world, by satellite. This project had begun several years. 22 thinking about business problems previously, and they had managed so far to roll it out to about half their offices. We determined that with currently available technology they could do the same thing for a fraction of the cost using conventional phone lines. By our calculations, they would have saved $170 million on a present value basis. We took our findings to the senior manager overseeing the engagement, the man who had brought us in to begin with, and he said, "Well, that's terrific. We appreciate that it could have saved us a few $100 million, but we've already started down this road and, politically, it's just too risky. You have to realize that we only have a certain amount of energy in the organization and, frankly, we need ideas that are bigger than this." At one level, it's unbelievable that he didn't accept our idea. But on another level, we were coming up with other suggestions that would save the organization $500 million or $1 billion. So this was, if not exactly chicken feed, just a medium-sized payoff for them. It's a rational response. If I can do only 3 things, I'll do the 3 biggest. McKinsey hires people with stellar academic records and enforces a rigorous discipline in analyzing problems and structuring solutions. Because of this, a McKinseyite's, especially a new hire's, first instinct is to go hell for leather after the very best solution. Unfortunately, when academic ideals meet business realities usually win. Businesses are full of real people, with real strengths and weaknesses and limitations. These people can do only so much with the finite resources available in their organizations. Some things they just cannot do, whether for political reasons, lack of resources, or inability. Developing an approach 23. As a consultant, you bear the responsibility for knowing the limitations of your client. If your client is your own employer, or your own business, that responsibility is doubled. Knowing those limitations, you must make sure that any recommendations you make fit within them. Sometimes you have to let the solution come to you. The McKinsey rules of problem solving, like all rules, have their exceptions. You will not be able to form an initial hypothesis every time. Sometimes, the client will not know what the problem is, just that there is a problem. Other times, the scope of your project will be so large, or so vague, that starting with an IH will be worthless. Still other times, you will be breaking new ground and nothing in your experience will point to a solution. Don't panic. If you get your facts together and do your analyses, the solution will come to you. Hamish McDermott, former EM at the firm, recounted this story. I was on a study where we were trying to improve the performance of the foreign exchange business of a major bank. We were supposed to reduce costs in the back office opera tie-in by 30%. I had nothing at that stage that I could point to, no initial hypothesis about how to get those costs out of the organization. Frankly, we knew very little about how the back office processing worked. 24. Thinking about business problems. I had to interview the woman in charge of back office processing along with her senior staff. She didn't mean to be unpleasant, although it certainly felt that way, but she came right out and said, "You've never done this before and you know nothing about this business. One of two things is going to happen. Either you'll come back with something we don't agree with, which will necessarily be wrong, or you'll listen to us and come back with what we already know, in which case you've added no value. We understand that you're here and that you're working on this, but from our point of view it's a total waste of our time and the bank's money." Still, she gave us the data we asked for. It turned out that one product, which represented about 5% of their business, was producing about 50% of their costs. We were able to fix that. They'd had no idea this was going on. In subsequent stages of the engagement, we were able to extend this analysis to other parts of the business and we highly exceeded our targets. The moral of this story is that an initial hypothesis is not a prerequisite for successful problem solving. Having one will help organize and forward your thinking, but if you can't come up with one, don't despair. Any McKinseyite will tell you that no business problem is immune to the power of fact-based analysis. Put together enough facts, combine them with some creative thinking, and you will come up with a solution. Developing an approach 25. Some problems you just can't solve. Solve them anyway. Eventually, you will run into a brick wall that is tougher than your head. Don't keep pounding, it has no effect on the wall and does your head no good. My unofficial mentor at McKinsey asked me to work with him on what promised to be a fun and exciting study. The client, a major financial institution in the midst of reorganizing its investment management business, faced severe challenges of heroic diamond science, thousands of employees, billions of dollars. The McKinsey team included my mentor and my favorite EM. It seemed the perfect recipe for an enjoyable, challenging McKinsey engagement. The recipe might have been right, but the result left a bad taste in our mouths. Factions within the client's senior management prevented us from doing our job. Data we asked for arrived late, or in an unusable form or not at all. People we needed to interview refused to speak with us. The members of the client team vigorously pursued their own agendas at the expense of reaching a solo tie-in. We spent several uncomfortable months on this study and, in the end, had to make what recommendations we could, declare victory, and get out. My team's experience was hardly unique in the history of the firm. The road of problem solving is often strewn with obstacles. Data to prove your hypothesis may be missing or bad. Sometimes businesses realize too late that they have a problem. By the time McKinsey, or anyone, addresses the problem, the business is already doomed. The biggest obstacle, the troll guarding the bridge, is politics. 26. Thinking about business problems. The first thing to understand about politics, and how it can help or hinder you from doing your job, is that businesses are full of real people. When you look at the boxes on an organization chart, you are really looking at people. When you move those boxes around, you change someone's life. As one former McKinsey EM remarked, sometimes change management means just that, changing management. When members of a McKinsey team go into a client, they carry change with them. Some at the client will welcome the bringers of change as white knights riding to the rescue. Others will see McKinsey as an invading army to either flee or drive out, depending on their power in the organization. As one former McKinseyite put it, it was a rare engagement when there wasn't at least one sector of the client organization that did not want us there and did not want us to come up with a real answer. In most cases, when senior management brings in McKinsey, enough players in the organization will cooperate willingly and McKinsey can be effective. A few malcontents may grumble or even cause trouble, but in the end they will be either converted to McKinsey's cause or bypassed. Sometimes, however, one powerful faction in an organization calls in McKinsey against the wishes of another powerful faction. That's when trouble arises, as we found out. You have several options to pick from when confronted by a problem that seems too difficult to solve. Redefine the problem. You can tell your client that the problem is not X, it's Y. This is especially useful when you know that solving Y will add a lot of value, whereas trying to wrestle with X would cost a lot of time and resources for little result. If you make this switch very early on, you show great business judgment. If you do it after several weeks' work, you risk being accused of a cop-out. Developing an approach. 27. Tweak your way to a solution. Sometimes you will come up with a great solution that you know the client organization cannot implement. This is especially true with organizational change. It is easy to devise an optimal organization, but you ally have to deal with the personnel resources that the client already has. When that happens to you, expand your time horizon. Don't worry about implementing your solution immediately. As people leave the organization, you can tweak your way to your optimum over time. Work through the politics. Even political problems are solubly. Most people in business are rational, at least in their business conduct. They react to incentives. Therefore, when you face political opposition, it usually means that your solution has negative implications for someone in the organization. So politics is just people acting in their own interests. To work through the politics, you must think about how your solution affects the players in an organization. You must then build a consensus for change that takes account of the different incentives and organizational factors driving the politics. Consensus building may require you to change your solution to make it acceptable. Do it. Remember that politics is the art of the possible, and it's no good devising the ideal solution if the client refuses to accept it. 3 80/20ths and other rules to live by. This chapter contains a number of rules that McKinsey consultants have found useful when trying to solve problems. They are difficult to classify. The 80/20 rule is one of the great truths of management consulting and, by extension, of business. You will see it wherever you look. 80% of your sales will come from 20% of your sales force. 20% of a secretary's job will take up 80% of her time. 20% of the population controls 80% of the wealth. It doesn't always work. Sometimes the bread falls butter side up, but if you keep your eyes peeled for examples of 80/20ths in your business, you will come up with ways to improve it. I saw the 80/20 rule at work all the time at McKinsey. and I've always been impressed by its power as a problem-solving rule of thumb. In my first ever McKinsey study, when I was between years at business school, I joined a team working with a large New York brokerage house. The board of directors wanted McKinsey to show them how to improve the profitability of their institutional equity brokerage business, the selling of stocks to large pension funds and mutual funds like Fidelity and T. Rowe Price. When a client asks the question, "How do I boost my profits?" the first thing McKinsey does is take a step back and ask the case tie-in, "Where do your profits come from?" The answer to this is not always obvious, even to people who have been in their particular business for years. To answer this question for our client, our team went through every account of every broker and every trader by customer. We spent several weeks analyzing this mountain of data from every conceivable angle, but when we ran the numbers, there are some of the first things we saw. 30 Thinking about business problems. 80% of the sales came from 20% of the brokers. 80% of the orders came from 20% of the customers. 80% of the trading profit came from 20% of the traders. These results pointed to some serious problems in the way the client allocated its staff resources, and we focused on those like a laser. Once we started digging, we found that the situation was more complex than simply 80% of the sales staff is lazy or incompetent, not that we ever thought that was the case to begin with. We discovered, to give one example, that our client's 3 top brokers handled the 10 biggest accounts. By sharing these big accounts out among more brokers, and by dedicating 1 senior and 1 junior broker to each of the 3 largest customers, we actually increased total sales from these accounts. Rather than divide up the pie more fairly, we increased the size of the pie. Thus, 80/20ths gave us a jumpstart in solving the client's problem. 80/20ths is all about data. What are your sales figures by product? What is your margin by product? How does each member of your sales team perform in terms of sales? In terms of profits? What is the success rate of your research teams? What is the geographical distribution of your customers? If you know your business well, and you'd better if you want to survive, then you know the right questions to ask. When you have your data, put it on a spreadsheet or in a database. Sort it in various ways. Play with the numbers. You will begin to see patterns, clumps that stand out. Those patterns will highlight aspects of your business that you probably did not realize. They may mean problems, a big problem if 80% of your profits come from 20% of your product lines, but they also mean opportunities. Find the opportunities and make the most of them. 80/20 and other rules to live by. 31. Don't boil the ocean. Work smarter, not harder. There's a lot of data out there relating to your problem, and a lot of analyses you could do. Ignore most of them. McKinsey gathers enough facts to prove or disprove a hypothesis or support or refute an analysis, and only enough facts. This is the flip side of fact-based analysis in a business situation. Anything more is a waste of time and effort when both are precious commodities. I had this lesson brought home to me late one night while I was drafting a fact pack on a client's competitor. I had gathered a mountain of data and was trying to wring out a few new insights from it. My EM, Vic, walked into my office, briefcase and code in hand, and asked how my work was going. I told him it was going well, but I thought I could pull together a few more charts. He picked up my draft, leafed through it, and said, "Ethan, it's 11 o'clock. The client will love this. No one will be able to absorb more than you have here. Call it a day. Don't boil the ocean." We shared a cab home. Don't boil the ocean means don't try to analyze everything. Be selective, figure out the priorities of what you are doing. No. When you have done enough, then stop. Otherwise, you will spend a lot of time and effort for very little return, like boiling the ocean to get a handful of salt. 32 Thinking about business problems. Find the key drivers. Many factors affect your business. Focus on the most important ones, the key drivers. In any McKinsey team meeting where problem solving is on the agenda, someone will use the inelegant phrase, key drivers, as in, Vic, I think these are the key drivers of this issue. In other words, there may be 100 different factors affecting the sales of our widgets, weather, consumer confidence, raw material prices, but the three most important ones are X, Y, and Z. We'll ignore the rest. Engineers learn something called the square law of computation. It states that for every component of a system, for every additional equation in a problem, the amount of computation required to solve the system increases at least as fast as the square of the number of equations. In other words, if the complexity of the number of equations. In other words, if the complexity of your problem doubles, the time it takes to solve it quadruples, unless you make some simplifications. For example, our solar system contains millions of objects, all having gravitational effects on one another. When analyzing planetary motion, astronomers start by ignoring most of these objects. Focusing on the key drivers means drilling down to the core of the problem, rather than picking the whole problem apart piece by piece, layer by layer. Then, you can apply thorough, fact-based analysis where it will do the most good and avoid going down blind alleys. 80/20 and other rules to live by 33. For an in-depth discussion of the square law of computation and other issues of complex ITY and problem solving, see Gerald M. Weinberg, An Introduction to General Systems Thinking, New York, John Wiley & Sons, 1975. Syntactical foibles aside, key drivers is a very powerful concept. It saves you time. It saves you effort. It keeps you from boil ing the ocean. The elevator test. Know your solution, or your product or business, so thoroughly that you can explain it clearly and precisely to your client, or customer or investor, in 30 seconds. If you can do that, then you understand what you're doing well enough to sell your solution. Imagine it's time for that big, end-of-engagement presentation. You and your team have been up until 2 a.m. putting together your blue books, making sure that every I has been dotted and every T crossed. You're all wearing your best suits and trying to look on the ball. The senior executives of your Fortune 50 client, anxious to hear McKinsey's words of wisdom, are taking their places around the boardroom table on the top floor of the corporate skyscraper. The CEO strides into the room and says, "Sorry, folks. I can't stay. We have a crisis and I have to go meet with our lawyers." Then he turns to you and says, "Why don't you ride down in the elevator with me and tell me what you found out?" The ride will take about 30 seconds. In that time, can you tell the CEO your solution? Can you sell him your solution? That's the elevator test. Many companies use the elevator test or something similar, because it's an excellent way of making sure that their executives. 34 Thinking about business problems. A McKinsey presentation document, so called because it is bound with blue cardboard covers. Time gets used efficiently. Procter & Gamble tells its managers to write one-page memos. A Hollywood producer will tell a screenwriter to "give me the bullet" on a new script. If, after 30 seconds, the producer likes what she's heard, the writer will get a chance to talk further, and maybe make a sale. Jason Klein instituted the elevator test when he took over as president of Field & Stream. My sales force could not explain the magazine to customers. Our advertisement space was shrinking. Then I trained my entire sales force on the elevator test. I challenged them to explain the magazine to me in 30 seconds. It became a valuable tool for them, and our ad base has grown every year. How do you encapsulate 6 months' work in 30 seconds? Start with the issues that your team addressed. The client wants to know the recommendations for each issue and the payoff. If you have a lot of recommendations, stick to the 3 most important, the ones with the biggest payoffs. Don't worry about the supporting data, you can talk about that when you have more time. For example, your analysis shows that a manufacturing client can't sell enough widgets because its sales force is organized by territory when it should be organized by buyer category. You have lots of data illustrating this: analyses of salespeople by buyer type, buyer interviews, field visits to retail and wholesale outlets, and so forth. When you're on that elevator ride, just tell the CEO, "We think you can boost sales of widgets by 50% in 3 years if you reorganize your sales force by buyer category. We can talk about the details later. Good luck with the lawyers." 80/20 and other rules to live by 35. Pluck the low-hanging fruit. Sometimes in the middle of the problem-solving process, opportunities arise to get an easy win, to make immediate improvements, even before the overall problem has been solved. Seize those opportunities. They create little victories for you and your team. They boost morale and give you added credibility by showing anybody who maybe watch ing that you're on the ball and mean business. Whenever possible, McKinsey consultants put this doctrine into practice. Clients can get very impatient for a result during the 6 months, or more, that a big McKinsey engagement can last. Giving the client something practical before the end helps reduce the pressure on the team. At my stockbroker client, after we had derived a number of insights, thanks to 80/20ths, from our analysis of sales and trading data, we wanted to communicate our findings to the senior managers of the institutional equities department. We set up a meeting with the department head and the heads of all the business units in the division: sales, trading, research, and so on. Since I had taken the lead in the actual analysis of the data, I got to present our findings. They hit this group of very experienced Wall Street executives like a hammer. The client had no idea just how inefficient its operation was. The presentation had 2 important effects. First, it convinced those executives who had not been particularly keen on McKinsey's presence in the first place that they had a problem and we could help solve it. Second, because I had presented the findings, their opinion of me rose quite sharply and my job became a lot easier. 36. Thinking about business problems. Before the meeting, I was some smart-ass MBA poking around their business. After the meeting, I was someone who was work ing for them to solve their problems. By plucking the low-hanging fruit, by resisting the temptation to hoard our information until some big end-of-study presentation, we made our client more enthusiastic, our jobs easier, and ourselves happier. This rule is really about satisfying your customer in a long-term relationship. Your customer could be the purchaser of your products, or it could be a client for your services, or it could be your boss. Whoever it is, it pays to keep him happy and let him know that he is your top priority. If you are on, say, a software design project with a 3-month lead time and you've put together a usable program that solves part of the problem in 2 weeks, show it to your boss. Don't wait. Solving only part of a problem can still mean increased profits. Just don't let anybody think you've given up on a complete solution. Those little wins help you and your customers. Make a chart every day. During the problem-solving process, you learn something new every day. Put it down on paper. It will help you push your thinking. You may use it, or you may not, but once you have crystallized it on the page, you won't forget it. Making a chart every day may strike you as somewhat anal retentive. It is. Then again, when you are trying to craft facts into solitarians, that is not so bad. 80/20 and other rules to live by 37. In the course of a typical day at McKinsey, you could start with a quick brainstorming session at 9 a.m., move on to a client interview at 10, a factory tour at 11, and then a sandwich lunch with your director. You might follow this with more client interviews, an end-of-day team meeting, and then a quick trip down to Wharton to participate in a recruiting seminar. In the midst of all this, it is very easy for the facts to blend into one another like pools of different colored inks on a sheet of blotting paper. Even if you take good notes at your interviews and have the minutes of your team meetings, important points could get lost. You can avoid this by sitting down for half an hour at the end of the day and asking yourself, what are the 3 most important things I learned today? Put them down in a chart or two, nothing fancy, neatness doesn't count. If the facts don't lend themselves to charting, although McKinseyites try to put every thing in charts, just write them down as bullet points. Put your results someplace where they won't get lost, don't just toss them into your in tray. Later, when you are in analysis mode, you can come back to your charts and notes and think about what they mean and where they fit in terms of your solution. Of course, this little tip can be taken too far. One EM from Germany, while working out of the New York office, would write a whole presentation every night. I wouldn't recommend this for most people, at least those with a life. Then again, the EM was far from home, didn't know anyone in town, and had nothing better to do. He should have followed some of the suggestions presented in Part 4. 38. Thinking about business problems. Hit singles. You can't do everything, so don't try. Just do what you're supposed to do and get it right. It's much better to get to first base consistently than to try to hit a home run and strike out 9 times out of 10. Shortly after I joined McKinsey, the New York office held a retreat at a resort upstate. One day we associates had to interrupt our strenuous regimen of golf, paintball, and wine tasting to hear a LEC tour. Hey, you have to do some work at these things. The speaker was the CEO of a major electronics company, a client of the firm, and a McKinsey alumnus himself. His main message was, don't try to knock the ball out of the park. Hit singles. Get your job done, don't try to do the work of the whole team. His speech took me by surprise. McKinsey associates have spent their whole lives knocking it out of the park. They all have first-class academic backgrounds combined with records of achievement in other fields. They had to impress a group of sharp-eyed and skeptical McKinsey consultants just to make it past the first job interview at the firm. To gear down upon joining would strike most of them as strange, if not distasteful. It took several years of gaining perspective before I understood the wisdom of the CEO's words. There are 3 reasons he was right. It's impossible to do everything yourself all the time. If you manage it once, you raise unrealistic expectations from those around you. Once you fail to meet expectations, it is very difficult to regain credibility. 80/20 and other rules to live by. 39. It's impossible to do everything yourself all the time. Business problems are complicated, the problems McKinsey deals with silently so. If you don't leverage the other members of your team to solve these problems, you are wasting valuable resources. The principle applies as much to senior managers as to junior executives whose MBA diplomas are still wet with ink. Very few people have the brainpower and energy to be a one-man show all the time. If you manage it once, you raise unrealistic expectations from those around you. Suppose, for a moment, that you manage, through superhuman effort, to perform well beyond what is normally expected of you. You hit that ball out of the park and, what the heck, the bases were loaded. Congratulations. Of course, now your boss or your shareholders will expect you to do the same thing every time you step up to the plate. Once you fail to meet expectations, it is very difficult to regain credibility. At McKinsey, it is said that you are only as good as your last study. If you have one bad engagement, all your hard work before that doesn't matter. EMs won't want you on their teams. You won't be staffed on the interesting projects. You won't be put in a position to excel. Your career at the firm will suffer. Prepare your resume. The same thing happens in the stock market. A high-flying company that posts 20% profit increases every year sees its stock price soar. When it misses one quarter, even by as little as a cent, its momentum reverses. Wall Street drops the stock like a hot potato and its share price plummets. After that, even when the company gets back on the growth track, several years can go by before investors trust it enough to pile back in. When I was a kid, I had a fantasy baseball board game. You picked your team from a combination of then current players, Carl Yastrzemski, Sandy Koufax, Roberto Clemente, and baseball leg ends, Ruth, Cobb, DiMaggio. Each player came on a circle of paper marked out in sections printed with a result, single, double, home run, strikeout, and so forth. The size of each section depended on the player's career record. To play the game, you'd put the circle around a little pointer and spin the pointer. Wherever it landed was the result for that player's turn at bat. The one thing I remember from that game was that the home run kings like Ruth, DiMaggio, and Aaron had the biggest strikeout zones too. It's all very well to talk of the necessity to strive purposefully and, if you fail, to fail gloriously. It's okay for Mark McGwire to strike out a lot, as long as he keeps hitting those home runs. In the business world, though, you're much better off hitting singles. Look at the big picture. Every now and then, take a mental step back from whatever you're doing. Ask yourself some basic questions. How does what you're doing solve the problem? How does it advance your thinking? Is it the most important thing you could be doing right now? If it's not helping, why are you doing it? When you are trying to solve a difficult problem for your client or company, you can easily lose sight of your goal amid the 1,000,001 demands on your time. It's like you are hip deep in a bog, following a muddy channel that you can't see. Analysis B follows analysis A and seems in turn to be followed seamlessly by analysis C. New data comes in and points to yet more analyses with which to fill your days and nights. When you're feeling swamped by it all, take a metaphorical step back and figure out what it is you're trying to achieve. Do 80/20 and other rules to live by 41. This by looking at the big picture, the set of issues that make up your operating hypothesis. How does what you're doing fit into the big picture? A particular analysis may be intellectually correct, even interesting, but if it doesn't take you closer to a solution, it's a waste of time. Figure out your priorities. You can do only so much in a day. There is nothing quite so frustrating as looking back over the course of a day or week and realizing, not that you haven't come up with any end products, but that what you have come up with is worthless in terms of the problem at hand. As one former McKinsey EM told me, perhaps the most valuable thing I learned during my time at the firm was to think about the big picture, to take a step back, figure out what I'm trying to achieve, and then look at whatever I'm doing and ask myself, does this really matter? Just say, I don't know. The firm pounds the concept of professional integrity into its associates from their first day on the job, and rightly so. One important aspect of professional integrity is honesty, with your clients, your team members, and yourself. Honesty includes recognizing when you haven't got a clue. Admitting that is a lot less costly than bluffing. It was the morning of an important progress meeting at our client, a Fortune 50 manufacturing company. The team and John, our ED, * were going over the various sections of the presentation. I. 42 thinking about business problems. * engagement director, also called a partner. The ED is in charge of a study, and most EDs head up several studies at one time. EDs have an equity stake in the firm. Had already been through my piece of it. I had been up until 4 a.m. getting it ready and I was exhausted. As the discussion moved to another section, one that I had nothing to do with and knew little about, my brain started slipping into that blissful place known as sleep. I could hear the other members of the team discussing various points, but their words slipped away from my mind like water through a child's cupped fingers. Suddenly, my reverie evaporated as John asked me, "So, Ethan, what do you think about Susie's point?" Momentary shock and fear yielded to concentration as I tried to recall what had just been said. Years of Ivy League and business school reflexes took over and I came out with a few lines of general agreement. Of course, what I said might just as well have come out of a horse's backside. If I had told John, "I'm not really sure, I haven't looked at this issue before," would have been fine. Even if I had said, "Sorry, I just lost it for a minute," he would have understood. After all, he had been through exactly the same experience, like every other McKinseyite. Instead, I tried to fake it, and ended up slipping in my own horse feathers. At the end of the engagement, several weeks later, the team had its final party. We went out to TGI Fridays, ate a lot of nachos, and drank a lot of beer. Then the EM began presenting each of the team members with presents of a rude and/or humorous nature. For my gift, he handed me a little desktop picture frame around the following words, neatly printed in the McKinsey official font: "Just say, I don't know." This is sage advice, and that picture frame remains on my desk to this day. 80/20 and other rules to live by 43. Don't accept, "I have no idea." People always have an idea if you probe just a bit. Ask a few pointed questions, you'll be amazed at what they know. Combine that with some educated guessing, and you can be well along the road to the solution. If you ask people a question about their business and they tell you, "I have no idea," don't just walk away in defeat. "I have no idea" is a code. It really means, "I'm too busy to take the time to think about this," or "I don't think I'm smart enough to know about these things," or worst of all, "I'm too lazy to come up with anything useful." Don't accept, "I have no idea," treat it as a challenge. Like the sculptor who turned a block of marble into an elephant by chiseling away everything that didn't look like an elephant, you must chip away at "I have no idea" with pointed questions. When Jason Klein wanted to put together a new business unit, he was sure that his top competitor was outspending him by a factor of 10. How could he prove this to his board of directors so they would give him more funding? He told his team to put together a P&L, profit and loss statement, for the competitor that showed what it was spending. As he recalls it, "When I first suggested that we do this analysis, my people said, 'We have no idea.' So I challenged them. Did they know how much our competitor was spending on advertising? No, but they could make an educated guess. Did they know how much our competitor was spending on product tie-in costs? No, but they could make an estimate of the competitor's cost per issue and multiply that by reported circulation." And so it went. 44 Thinking about business problems. In the end, we put together a pretty comprehensive P&L backed up by solid assumptions. It may have been off by a factor of 2, but who cares? What mattered was that it was accurate enough to make the business decision that was on the table. Just as you shouldn't accept "I have no idea" from others, so you shouldn't accept it from yourself, or expect others to accept it from you. This is the flip side of "I don't know." With a bit of thinking and searching, you will usually find that you do know or can find out something about a question or issue, unless, of course, you have fallen asleep in the middle of a team meeting.